Thank you, Dave. I'll call this meeting of the school committee for February the 7th, 2022 to order. I'm sorry, March 7th, 2022 to order. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is the school committee member introductions for the public. I'll start with Ms. Paquette.
Good evening, Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Paul Bopalant, Ward 7.
Linda Scott, City Council Representative.
Thank you. Third item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any members of the committee that would like to have any of the items that are on the agenda set aside for any reason? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. The next item on the agenda is public input. Members of the public may now address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personnel matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee, be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and affiliation to Lewiston Public Schools. Ms. Parks.
I don't know procedurally if this is allowed, but I know that there's been some discussion about switching the agenda items to allow some people who are here to comment on something that's later in the agenda. Would it be simpler procedurally to allow them to speak during public comment on that item rather than moving the agenda item?
I mean, I mean,
Your mic.
I guess I would.
No, if it's not, that's fine. It just seemed like it might flow a little bit better, but that's
I
okay.
mean, I think what's gonna happen is we're probably gonna move the agenda item, so it'll come right up anyway, so I think it kind of moved at this point. We'll leave it like it is. Seeing none, I'll close the public session. Ms. Scott.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we move agenda item number 6 ahead of the budget conversation item number 5.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion about moving it? Ms. Bowden?
Thank you. I was just wondering, do we need to suspend the rules first procedurally, or is this okay to just do?
No, they're both agenda items. It's
Okay.
just changing the order in which they come up.
Okay.
Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. So moved. We'll move agenda item 6 to the next item. Agenda item number 6 is to receive and potentially vote on the second reading of policy IMDA patriotic exercises.
So I'll just chime in with the difference in this policy that we have discussed in the past and the current policy in this proposal is really about getting written permission from your parents to exercise your interest in not participating in the Pledge of Allegiance. That language has been extracted so that students would not have to get written permission from a parent to exercise that freedom.
Is there anything else from the committee? Ms. Bowden?
Thank you, Bruce, or Chair Bruce. David, sorry. I always say it wrong. So I heard from some constituents this week regarding this policy, And while they didn't have a problem with the removal of the written piece of it, the problem that they're having is, well, first, let me just ask Chair Damon, if you know the answer to this. If not, Superintendent Langlois, if protesting is allowed during school hours from students.
Being disruptive and protesting?
Are protests allowed during school hours, like from students?
Go ahead. Jay.
I guess there's a lot of ways to consider that. I would always, if something came to me at my desk that was student related along the lines of protest, to me, it would be about a litany of other policies. But if it's not disrupting the instruction or the school day, I would lean toward it not being a violation of disciplinary procedures. Or policy, I should say. We have had some other things where students wear a specific color to represent a thing to kind of take a stance, or something with some phrasing or symbolism to it. That is not a violation of our policy, but is obviously a thing, a form of protest, if you will. So we have had to work through those kinds of situations. But if it doesn't disrupt the learning environment, I think that's where I would be trying to navigate. Is this a protest, or is this a statement of some sort?
Thank you. So some of the constituents that I heard from are veterans, and they feel as though remaining seated or kneeling is a form of protesting when the Pledge of Allegiance is happening. So they would like to see some language added that students who do not participate must remain standing and refrain from disruptive and distracting behavior. Whether they say it or not is up to them, but that was the issue that my constituents were having. And so I suppose I would like to see that language added, if at all possible. Do I make an amendment, request an amendment? I'm sorry.
There's no motion on the floor yet.
Okay.
And I mean, we're working on the language that's currently been adopted as a first reading.
Mhm.
So I guess we'd have to see what once we get to it, we'll see what the will of the committee is as to whether or not we modify it.
Okay.
Anyone else from the committee? Ms. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I too would like to, I have also had folks reach out to me, particularly veterans in our community. I will be very frank and honest. I very much believe in our First Amendment right. And our First Amendment right does state that we have the right to not say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I consider that being patriotic when we follow our First Amendment right. That being said, I do come from a family of veterans, and I do understand where this can be something that's heartfelt. These are folks that have sacrificed for our country, and the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag and our national anthem mean a lot to them. It was something that they stood by when they served our country. And so I think it's very imperative that we hear from those folks and we listen and we understand where they're coming from. I'd also like to recognize that the students that brought this policy to our attention, a policy that hadn't been addressed since 2012, I'd like to commend, because they took the time, they studied this policy, they studied the Constitution, they studied what happened in the Supreme Court around the policy in our country on standing for the flag. And I think that in and of itself also shows a tremendous amount of patriotism and learning about our country. And I think that's important to recognize. So I would concur with my fellow committee member that I would like to see further discussion, and if at all possible, maybe table the vote on this if the rest of the committee feels comfortable with that, and further having a discussion on what might be possible changes in the language. But I would like to hear what everybody else has to say about that. Thank you.
Others on the committee? Seeing none, I'll open it. Whoop, Mr. Superintendent.
One thing, both from the students' work they shared and also looked up and actually learned a little bit about the court proceedings that had been involved in these cases dating back to the 70s. One early 70s, one later in the 70s, and then I think some new challenges not so many years ago. But Supreme and/or Circuit Court have stated that mandating it is a violation of the First Amendment. And so regardless of what ends up in the policy locally, and I will share in my house, we stand, we take our hat off and we participate. And I believe in that. But I also understand where kids came from with their language around this shift. I guess I'd be real curious whether we vote on this tonight or table it for another meeting, whether or not we have the legal grounds to require it. And in my read of the circuit court rulings, we do not.
Ms. Parks.
I would like to point out that the current policy on the Pledge of Allegiance that has been in place in this district since June of 2000. So for the last 12 years, clearly states that an excused student may stand, remain seated, or arrangements can be made that he or she may leave the room during the pledge. So that is the policy that we've been operating under for at least the last 12 years. I don't know what it was previous to that. And there hasn't been an issue with students being disrespectful that I'm aware of. So this change that is being proposed tonight would be a significant deviation from how we've already been operating for at least the last 12 years without any conflict.
Thank you. Anyone else on the committee? Ms. Ames.
Thank you. I think what we're pledging allegiance to is the right to have our own opinions and make our opinions known. So we're pledging allegiance to the flag, which symbolizes this notion of being free to think and act. So to me, it's not unpatriotic to follow the laws, which would allow people to sit or stand or not say anything. I think we rejected the idea of leaving the room last time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, I'd open it to the public for comment.
All right. Can you all hear me? My name is Don Robitaille. I live at the Old Green Road in Lewiston. I'm in Ward 4. About a month ago, I heard from Linda Scott, the liaison between the council and the school committee about this issue coming up. It just about broke my heart that the city of Lewiston is negotiating or talking about letting students not requiring to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I would say in rebuttal that it would be okay with me anyway to let them stand up and not say anything if they don't want to. But at least standing up to respect the flag that they are now living under. Probably where the students that are not standing up, wherever they came from, it was probably not an option. So them being in the United States, it just shows a disrespect for the flag and that they don't like what we're doing here for some reason or other. Someone else might want to come and talk to But that's how I feel. Are there any veterans on the council, by the way? Any veterans? Guess not. Thank you.
Hi, Danny Beggert, Commander for Androscoggin County for the American Legion. I was notified late of this meeting tonight and what was going to be on the agenda. So you have to excuse me. I'm not like prepared to give like a speech, but I will speak from the heart. I think I'm against allowing students to sit down or kneel during the Pledge of Allegiance. I think standing and respecting the flag that we fought under would be the better thing to teach our students. That flag and the Pledge of Allegiance is what covers my brothers and sisters that did not make it home. It covers that coffin for their mom and dad and brothers and sisters. And I think we owe them a great gratitude, and the way we can give gratitude to those veterans is to stand up and respect the flag that our country is based on. That's all I have. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Lane. I'm a City of Lewiston resident. I'm alumni of Lewiston Public School System, mother of a alumni of the public school system here. I'm also the Senior Vice Commander of the Veterans of Foreign War for the state of Maine. So I guess I have there's a couple of different things that I would like to address. One, a lot of us weren't privy to this, and maybe that's all our own faults as residents not attending each and every board meeting. I guess the clarification needs to be is what is being proposed for change from the current policy to this new proposal, because that's unclear in your discussion at the beginning of the meeting for us that aren't privy to the written proposal. The other thing is in citation of subsection 4805 with other special observances, including your flag, it said it shall be the duty of the instructors to press upon the youth by substantial reference and observances the significance of the flag, to teach them the cost, the object, the principles of our government, the sacrifices made by the founders of our nation, the important contributions made by all who have served in the armed services of their country since its inception, and to teach them to love, honor, and respect the flag of our country that costs so much and is so dear to every true American citizen. So my questions again are, what are the proposals for the change of the current policy? And citing this reference, what are we doing to enforce your reference? And what are we doing to eliminate from this reference?
Hi, I'm a student at the Lewiston High School, and I wanted to say that I think staying silent and sitting down is not disrespectful or disruptive and at all. I think talking, yes, during the Pledge of Allegiance is disrespectful and such, but I think sitting down and not talking is not disrespectful, because I believe that sitting down also exercises our First Amendment right, being freedom of speech. Of course, we sitting down and not being forced to stand up is truly patriotic, what I think. And I think the flag represents a different meaning for all of us here. I think that the flag means to me a lot of injustices that I face, that my friends face, and my family faces, and I simply just cannot stand up for that. I really can't. You might stand up for a different reason, being sorry, it's my first time talking up here, but yeah, you might have different reasons, and that's okay, but you shouldn't be forcing other people to stand up for reasons that are not their own. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi, I'm also a student at the high school. I'm sorry if I stutter. I'm not good at public speaking, but I don't think sitting down and kneeling for the flag is disrespectful either, because like my friend said, the flag has different meanings to everyone. And a lot of us might not agree with the words used in the flag, in the pledge, I mean, and a lot of us might not even believe in the God that we're standing under. So I think we should be able to sit down and choose what we do without having a parent speak for us, because a lot of parents might not believe in what the child wants to do.
Mr. Terry, is there a way I can share my screen? I don't think I have permissions to. I'd like to put the language up so that I can reference it.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Seidlinger, and I am with Honor Flight Maine, and I'm an advocate for veterans throughout the state and actually throughout our country. And when you sit with a World War II veteran who's also served in Korea, also served in Vietnam, and you understand and you hear their stories from living history that can't be taught in books, what that flag means to them, you get right here what standing for that flag means. From the time we're going to Fairview School, standing for that flag, I looked forward to it every morning. I have veterans that are in my family, World War II, Vietnam veterans that served 2-3 tours. And from a veteran standpoint and from learning their history, as a very young girl, I got it. And I think that the problem lies in due in part to many of the children or younger generation not understanding what the true meaning is and being able to give allegiance to it and understand that we'd be more unified if that was happening more, like we are doing for the Ukraine and showing their flag. And whatever your beliefs are, at least being willing to concede that veterans come back, they give the ultimate sacrifice with that flag on their casket, and that stands for something. It is just a very slippery slope when we start forgetting and we start not teaching and not enforcing the heritage and the history. And it is just, it's shameful. And I am sorry, but I know as a child, if I had not had that instilled in me and my parents didn't take the time or didn't make the time, and that if I had gone to school every day and it was just, this is the time, stand, sit, kneel, do whatever you'd like. I'm sorry, we really, our children and our young adults need to understand what that stands for and how many died, how many served, how many couldn't wait to raise that flag at Iwo Jima. You know, I mean, it is just, we're at critical times right now. And I believe with a school board that doesn't have one veteran sitting on it, that this should be tabled until we can have the representation from Lewiston and all the area here that would have been here tonight if we had known that this was coming. Now, you bring up a good point, ma'am, about this being on the way it's been for 12 years, doesn't mean that it's right. And maybe this would be a stance. This would be the time where we say, if you want to stand and you don't feel like speaking those words, it's not true to your heart, at least make that effort to stand with everyone unified and not be disrespectful with speaking or in any other way, but just stand as one. Maybe don't speak the words, maybe you don't know the words. That's another thing. But I truly believe that this needs to have more discussion And with no veterans on the school board, I don't know how many are on the city council. I can tell you, I meet with veterans every day from age 70 to 102. And this is huge. And I really hope that the school board will take that step and just board this. Think about it a little bit more and see what the wording should be and then come back again. Because we literally would have had over 100 people probably here tonight speaking what they feel from their heart and what they feel that the younger generation could do to pay respect and honor to them and our flag. I hope that you will consider that. Thank you.
Mr. Potvin.
Ron Potvin, 291 Pond Road, former school committee member from last year. My father would be rolling in the grave right now after having served and crashed the beaches of Normandy on that fateful day years ago. And I sit there and as I was listening to the discussion, wondered what my father would be saying, hearing this. And I think one big question would, he'd go, why? Why is it necessary, so necessary to rely on a First Amendment to practice not embracing this country? I, as a public service officer, has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of these United States on many occasions. You, as city council, school committee members, also take that oath. Many in public service take that oath. Certainly the military takes that oath. And that's far beyond just a recognition of a simple recognition of the flag and for what it stands for in this country. So I guess from my standpoint, I'm looking at trying to think what my father would say is, all right, if people find it necessary to do this, ask the question why and let them be. But there are citizen students out there who embrace this flag and who would excel with it and appreciate it. Oh, that's one other one I wanted to mention. Naturalized citizens in this country have to take an oath to uphold the Constitution of these United States. That being said, let the people do what they need to do. Let the students, if they need to sit out, but those that want to appreciate what this country is about, and I think we're at this point in time, let them take an oath to uphold the Constitution and be recognized for that. Let those that appreciate this country have the opportunity to do that. And I think that there has to be both ways. You know, if people are going to sit down and protest and are upset about some word or whatever, but never lose track of those that do appreciate this country and give them the opportunity to embrace it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Johanna Seltzer on 15 Delcliffe Lane. I hadn't planned on speaking, but as a parent in the district, I just want to say how proud I am of our students for bringing this conversation forward. I think it's up to our educators to engage this conversation. It's not a rote exercise every morning. It's clearly very important to engage this conversation fully. And so I appreciate all the viewpoints that were presented. And clearly this needs more discussion. It's important to our community. But at the end of the day, I am absolutely for a students' peaceful protest being protected with this policy change.
Anyone else? Mr. Superintendent.
So I want to share essentially the key takeaway. It was mentioned in some of the public comment of what's the kind of the main theme here. What's the difference between current standing policy and the new policy? What I've highlighted here says students who object to participating in the flag salute as a matter of conscience shall be excused from doing so upon submission of a request in writing and signed by a parent or guardian, which provides evidence of sincere conviction. And so that's the language that has been pulled out. It's procedural. And I think there was a lot of valuable things said just now from varying perspectives. But really, this is more if students make that choice for themselves. The new language talks about not disrupting others, not being disruptive, but it pulls out this language that you need to get a letter from home to exercise that.
Ms. Hurd.
So I wasn't initially going to speak, but after Ron spoke, so I am a naturalized citizen. I was adopted and and my parents brought me into this country. And so I have dual citizenship. And my mother, I've traveled a lot, and my mother always says to me, don't ever bring your Chilean passport, always bring your United States passport, because God forbid if something ever happened to you, this country will protect you. And those are the rights that we get as American citizens, that this country protects us, this country protects their own. We have that protection and security as United States citizens. And so I am glad that I was naturalized and I am an American citizen because I'm proud of my country. I'm proud of the opportunities that I've been given, that I'm able to have coming to this country for a better life. And that's why a lot of people do come to America. They're looking for something better. They're looking for something more. And I do think that if you choose not to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, you're forgoing that right. You're forgoing that right for the United States to protect you, to stand up for you, to potentially be in your corner. You don't necessarily have to say the words if that's what you don't believe in, but I see it as when it works in your favor, it's okay, but when it doesn't work in your favor, it's not. And I think we need to remember that we have a lot of rights as Americans. We have a lot of protection as Americans. And we can't always forget about those, I guess. So I, again, would hope that I think we need to have more discussion on this. I think we need to hear more points of view. I think we need to hear maybe more students, maybe the public. We need to hear more thoughts, what people are thinking, what students are seeing in school every day. We did have two students come up and talk to us, but I think we maybe need more students to come and talk to us and say what they're seeing every day in class. Like, what's happening? Are students standing? Are students sitting? Are students protesting? Are they getting in trouble by different teachers if they don't participate? Like, we need to see all the big picture before we can make a educated decision or vote, I feel like, on this matter.
Ms. Whitlow.
So you are right. We do have rights as Americans. It's our First Amendment right. And we have to remember that. We have the right to protest peacefully. And the flag does mean different things for other people, you know. I don't think that makes us less Americans. So I'm not military, but I'm a military family. Both my brothers are career military. My father, uncles. So the flag is very important to me, my family, but I also believe that everybody has the rights. They have the right to protest. So I'll say when I would say fourth grade, I had a kid in my class that for whatever reason, him and his family, they decided that they weren't going to stand for the flag. They didn't bother any of us in class. There was no disruption to class, and we respected that. There was no discussion. That was their thing. Okay. Is there like a volume? So what I'm just trying to say is that our First Amendment right gives us the right to protest peacefully. And so I would just think about that when we do vote. And listen, I'm the chair of the policy committee. So when I look at these things, it's not emotional for me. It's looking at the policy and how that relates to law, and what's best for our students and our staff. So, you know, I agree with the rights that we have. But I just want people to think about that. And I think Mr. Langless mentioned earlier that even if we did pass this with edits as far as standing, not sure that we would be able to uphold that at a school level, at a district level, because this is a bigger thing than district wide.
Mr. Bopalong.
Thank you. Thank you. Two things. First of all, we've heard of an excellent presentation from the students on the proposed change. Do we treat students as young adults able to make decisions on their own? I think is an important factor here. We've also heard how students have been kicked out of class, have been subject to punitive action for not standing for the pledge. I personally think that's horrendous. And my feelings are pretty clear on this. But secondly, with respect to our speakers and certainly Ron, my father fought at Normandy. He had his arm almost blown off. It changed his career plans from being a doctor to being a teacher. And I remember distinctly 1 month in 1968 when the Vietnam conflict was going on and it wasn't going very well. And there was a move by students in my small high school to walk out at the Pledge of Allegiance the next day. And I talked with my dad about that. And he said, "Are you willing to accept the consequences of your actions?" And I said, yes. And he asked why I was doing it. And I explained that, you know, the controversy of the war, and, you know, I was soon to reach draft age and I didn't think it was a valid war. And he said, if you have the courage of your convictions and you are willing to protest what you think is unjust, you are showing as much patriotism as the other people marching in the parades, which I did as a young boy with them. And there was an epiphany at that time. So it's total respect to the veterans. I've seen, you know, the effects of wounded veterans coming back, and I was too young to serve. But I'm pretty well set on this, and we'll vote on the student issue. Thank you.
Miss Ames.
I'm going to also invoke a father who went to Normandy, who was at Normandy on D-Day. So that's something, huh? He was very patriotic and he would have voted for this amendment, whatever we want to call it, in a heartbeat. And my mother is a naturalized American and incredibly patriotic. The most patriotic people are such converts to America. However, she too would be voting for this. I believe that this kind of silent protest is exactly what we're voting for, or exactly what we're pledging when we pledge to the flag.
I just wanted to note that this policy language shift, we went to Maine School Management, who uses lawyers to draft policy language that is something that we used when we have our starting blocks. So this language was not student drafted, although students have participated in other drafts of things. This language came directly from the legal supports of Maine School Management, verbatim. Students did see it and felt like it spoke to their concerns, but this is legal language as it was brought to you.
Anyone else on the committee? Ms. Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate that, what you just said, Superintendent Langley. And I was going to ask that question of our policy chairperson, because I think it's extremely important that we recognize that when this was updated, and that's exactly what is happening here, it's updated language, that it was updated, already looked at by, because it's direct language from the Maine Department of Education, correct? And if I might read just one little snippet of that policy, because I have it in front of me here. It says, individual students may decline to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. Students who do not participate must remain quiet and refrain from disruptive or distracting behavior while the pledge is being recited. I've got to tell you, that to me is showing respect. It's showing respect for those that are saying the Pledge of Allegiance. It is not, in my opinion, an actual protest. I recall being in high school doing actual protest and walking out of the school. So I don't see that as a protest. I also, though, want to recognize what we've been told here tonight. And I think that one thing that I see, it's extremely important to hear to what those two students just told us, but it's also extremely important to listen to what our vets have been telling us too. And I would like to see those two groups have conversations so that they can understand why are the students feel this way, but also why the veterans feel this way. I think it's extremely important. And I don't know if that's something that we could bring and facilitate, but I think that that would be something that we need to have go forward. There is a reason why the veterans feel so strong about this. It's in their heart. They've said it. They've stood up and said it. And I totally understand that. Again, we've all talked about, I think, none of us have been in the service. I personally wanted to go in the service. I was denied when I was 18 years old because of health issues, unfortunately, because my whole family served. And it was a huge, important piece in my life to join my Pepe, going to the VFW when we went to events, and being a part of all of that was really important to me. History is really important to me and my family. But we have to recognize why our students are saying the things they are. And I think Mr. Beaupalant's comment about what his dad said says a lot right there, that when you stand up for your First Amendment right, you are standing up for that flag. You're standing up for our Constitution that we all swear to stand up to. So I'm having a really difficult time with this. I really am. And I have to say that I respect everybody that came to speak with us, but I think that if this is language that's already been discussed by the Department of Education, and this is language that we know that lawyers have already vetted, this is language we should probably vote on.
Ms. Bowden?
Thank you. I echo a lot of the same things that you just said, Ms. Scott. But I will say that in listening to everybody tonight, it does sound like maybe there's more of the public that would like to come speak about this. I just believe that the older we get, or the older this country gets, I should say, there are a lot of things that are just becoming lost on the younger generation. And it just might be, it's not as near and dear to their heart because they haven't lived through a war. They don't have parents. I mean, for me, I have a grandfather who's a retired colonel. My father's a retired veteran. My brother's a veteran. So, it's something that's important to me. And I think it's important to a lot of our community members. So I would like to hear more. I would be more in favor of tabling this tonight and possibly having a discussion later on.
I know that Superintendent Langlis put the current version up to show everyone the slight change that's being proposed here. But I think it's really important, whether we table it or we vote on it, that it's made extremely clear that we're not putting in place a policy that is allowing disrespect. We're not putting in place a policy that says you don't have to show respect for the flag. You don't have to show respect for veterans. We're not advocating for disrespect. We're not advocating for kids to protest. We're continuing a policy that's already been in place, and we're allowing our students the right to the freedom that our veterans fought for. And some of those freedoms are freedoms to protest peacefully, or freedom to say what they do. The word God, I know there's been a lot of conversation in the past historically about having the word God in the Pledge of Allegiance. Our country has become so diverse that people have different gods. Some people don't believe in a god at all. Worshiping a flag in some religions is seen as idolacism, and we wouldn't want to force that on a student who doesn't believe in idolacism. I think that there's a lot of perspectives that are involved in our schools now that may not have been there 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I think the underlying focus is this isn't about disrespect, and this isn't about changing something and allowing inappropriate behaviors. It reinforces that you cannot be disrespectful during this time. You cannot be making a disruption, those kind of things. But it does allow people the personal freedoms that I believe our wars were fought for.
Anyone else on the council? On the committee, I should say, on the committee. Then I would respectfully ask someone to make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to call the question, please.
We don't have a motion on the table yet, Elizabeth.
I'm making a motion to whatever. Making a motion to approve the second reading. Thank you.
The second reading.
I'm new
of
to
the-
this.
of
And that's not the one we're approving, correct? That's another one? We need the one that we're actually approving. Oh, that's the one? Okay,
With the strikeout, right?
okay, got it.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Ms. Ames and seconded by Ms. Whitlow. Further discussion on the motion. Public comment is closed.
May I say
Ms.
something?
Ames.
The final part of this, if I remember correctly, affirms that teachers teach American history and the appreciation of the American way of life. And so I'm pretty sure that's still in there. And I just wanted to assure the veterans that this is not taking that out of the curriculum.
So the final column you're voting on isn't what you're showing.
The,
Yeah, promotes honor and respect for the flag.
the item on the screen is the proposed language.
There's a motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, Ward 1. That's me, and I'm yes. Ward 2,
No.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
No.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward at large. I'm sorry, council, I'm sorry, city council
Yes.
at large.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-2. Policy is adopted. Thank you. Mr. Beauplan.
We are having a third and final reading. Am I correct? Or,
Oh, 2 readings is it? That's it.
thank you.
So now we'll go back to item number 5, which is review of cost center categories under the budget. Mr. Superintendent.
All right, so we're gonna start our budget review process. I know that we met last week and we talked about some preliminary numbers and a deliberate effort to start where we're starting and make reductions to our budget so that we can bring a responsible budget to our city council. I want to start by just doing a quick binder review. So if everybody could go to their binders, you'll notice in the first few tabs, there may be some repeats from items that we talked about last time. All of the items went in the binder, so everybody would have everything. So I apologize if you have a duplication in your hand. If we turn past this first table of contents, you'll see the budget memo, at least the first version of it that we discussed in detail last time. That has not been changed. That is the same that you had last Wednesday. That will change through our process, so I can update both you and the community. But that's version 1. In the next tab, you can see our budget timeline with what items we'll be discussing at which times and what timeframes. And again, we changed this process a little bit so that we can really focus on those places of passion connected to our goals and give those things more time, while some other things are pretty quick. So we're being calculated with what things we're doing when, so that you have a chance to hear all of the items and really be thinking about the details of things as we start reductions after we get through our initial presentations. In the next tab, C, you have just the list of the articles with definitions of what are the items in them. Again, we'll reference those. And so, for example, tonight we're starting with Article 6, which is system administration, and we'll go through that. But if you have questions about what is in each of the articles, this is a good definition sheet to work off of. If you go to tab D, you can see the FY23 revenue budget. And so again, this is that starting point place, and we will continue to work through that. Remember, when we talk revenues, that's the money that comes into Lewiston Public Schools to finance or to pay for the educational experience that we put forth. And then we have the expenditures list, which in any kind of budget presentation like this, our expenditures have to match those revenues. So revenue is money coming in and expenditures is money going out. And so we'll make sure that those numbers all come together. If you look at that page in your binder, it goes back to 1819, and you can see the shift in what's been approved. And then that shaded area is the proposed at this point. Are we all set up there? Okay. All right. If you turn to tab E, and if you have questions as I go through this, just let me know, just procedurally. So in this, we've not used this page or this sheet before, but I wanted you to have a sense of the percent change and the amount change by each article as a whole. So in the past, you could find this, but it'd be at the bottom of a long spreadsheet of lists, which we also have for you. But this really pulls the actuals and the proposed language that you have in front of you right now. So for example, Article 6, which we're going to talk about tonight, if you go across, you can see that there's a percentage increase there that we want to articulate to you as we go about our proposals. Tab F. This is the summary by what we call org code. This is that budgeting software side of things. But what it helps you do is sometimes people ask questions like, okay, so regular instruction, well, how much is that at Farwell versus Connors versus another school? And what's the enrollment? So this is a good sheet to go to where you can see the percent adjustments. But this is a good comparison page, so you can see what things cost in which places. And that will run through, again, you have each building in each respective area. And those are all listed right on there.
How does that relate to the next big thing?
Yeah, a great question. So what this in tab F does, the question is, how does that relate to the next section, which is a little thicker or a lot thicker? The org codes are summarizing the level of detail, so you can see kind of a whole number. So you get a picture of what we call cost centers, which is really just building. So if you look at line 10 on this very first one, it says ELL K6 Farwell. So that is just K6, so there's no pre-K in that. And it's ELL, so it's English language learners. So that specific area, that's what that one line is. Now, when we go into the next section, you'll see much more detail. So you'll see position costs, benefits, healthcare, insurance, those kinds of things. They're all broken out. So it's almost like taking this and seeing what's under it. And so that's what's in that next tab. Sure.
So, because the next tab, I broke down each
Mhm.
section, each article. And so if I'm looking at the total of, we'll say, Article 3, career and technical education, and at the bottom, is that going to correlate with the same number that I'm going to see here in tab F?
Yeah, so the numbers will correlate, but it almost goes, I'm going to use food as an example. So in the prior tabs, you're kind of looking at the dish. So it's like lasagna.
Right.
And then this particular tab is like, well, it's a pasta dish and it's got red sauce. So I know that much. And in the next tab, it's what kind of meat, what kind of noodles, how long did you bake it? It's really getting
Yep.
into that next layer of specificity around the budget itself. So, but mentally, what will happen, at least what I've seen in the past, is you start looking at these different components and you'll want to zoom out sometimes. Because when you get buried in the thicker section, you start thinking of the math of things. So, well, if this one's this much and this one's this much, what does that mean for the ELL budget at Farwell? Well, you can zoom to this page and see that's what it means specifically for ELL at Farwell. And then tab G, where we will spend plenty of time together. This gets into that nitty gritty. So when you see this first one, so in line 9 on the very first page, that's Article 1 regular instruction. And you see ELL K6 Farwell. And then it breaks down salary, ed tech for teachers, the ed tech, the support staff, the benefits, the insurance. So that gets into the nitty gritty of what's in the dish. And so that's how all this breaks down. Or you can zoom in, you can zoom out using each of these tabs.
Line 35 on this page will align with that first thing on F.
Yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we do our work through this budget process, we will still reference these sheets. Unless you really want one, I don't anticipate reprinting the bigger pieces. But it will start to get away from some of these numbers because of the reductions we make. But I'll make sure that we're keeping a running tab of that. And it could be something that we print and you put in the back or take notes as we go. So as we bring savings to you, we know where they're going to end. Adam and Bill are here kind of in the back, and they may chime in as well as Sue. But they're tracking these things as we discuss them, and we talk about them during the day also. So when we bring things to you, they will know about it. We also have a pretty good sense of just how much has what kind of impact on things like tax rate, or when we see things like insurance, we budgeted 12%. Because insurance doesn't come out until the end of March. And the end of March, it's a max, it's like a cap. It won't be above this, but you don't know as a district what it will be. So what happened last year is it was 0%. So in the budget process, I think last year we budgeted 6 or 8% initially. We were able to pull those numbers out midstream or towards the end of March, because we found out what the cap was. And when it came out as 0, it kind of told us our local detail. We don't anticipate that this year. And so what we will do is we'll watch that. But Adam and Bill have done the math behind it and estimated, one example, if it comes out anything less than 12%, for every 1%, it's roughly $119,000 locally. So if it comes out at 11% as a cap, we can cut $119,000 right out of this budget instantly. If it's multiples, then we'll do the math. But if it's, for every 4.5%, roughly, it's going to be $500,000. So we're hopeful for low insurance premium percentages, but that's yet to be seen.
And you were over conservative on that number, correct? With the 12%.
I wouldn't
hoping?
say we were over conservative. Actually, we've seen and heard in other districts a number as high as 16%. So it's a calculated estimate. We think it'll be lower than that, but we have seen higher than that. And so the worst conversation I want to have with you this spring is to find out that it's 13 or 14%. That would be a detriment to the conversation, but it is feasible.
Okay.
Very unlikely, but feasible. I'm hopeful that that's a place where we can get $500,000 to $750,000 out of this budget. from a savings perspective, but we just won't know. And Adam, is it March 24th? Is that the date that the max will be shared? It's towards the end of March. So I hold my breath until then. And then when it comes out, you just, praying it's not higher and hoping it's as low as possible. But it's to be seen. There are some, sure.
I just wanted to put a little bit of what my knowledge is in negotiations. Obviously, we're quite aware, we talk about insurance costs all the time in negotiations. So we know that last year it was 0 increase and it hasn't been very big the previous years. So I think we all knew that it was going to have to be a big jump, especially after the whole COVID and all of that. So it wouldn't, to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if it was more than 12%, but I hope not.
Just hearing that made my whole facial expression change.
Right?
Thank you for that positive comment.
Yeah. There's some other things that you'll see in here too. There's some numbers that really make a substantial jump, and we'll articulate those. But sometimes when you see a substantial jump, it's because of where things are at in conversations with different collective bargaining groups. And so we are in a challenging spot in that we don't have all the numbers from settled negotiations yet, but we have a number of groups in negotiations. And so what we try to do is conservatively place things in the budget so we don't approve collective bargaining agreements that we can't afford. And so I just need you to know that's a constant moving target, and it is every single year because of negotiations and what groups have filed to have an opener. And it's no different for the city or other places. We'd love to have them all done, but it's just not the reality. There are some spare tabs in the back. I didn't know if you wanted to pull them at times to go to different things, but I would like to walk you through where different breaks are. So if you want to look at further detail, on the left-hand side of the thick one, those lines are numbered. So it's a good reference point. So these are numbered in order on the left side. So you may not have a page number, but I can reference a specific line. And so, for example, let me get to one that I want to.
I did the same thing. I wrote a number on every page.
So if you jump forward, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 pages or so, but it's line 657. So this is just a little bit of practice so you can. Line 657. Yep. So you're seeing total Article 1, and then the next line down is the start of Article 2. Pardon?
I wish it was on a new page, like starting Article 2 on a new page.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to generate this. It's 5 separate PDFs merged.
So what have you got? Object code, code by object code.
Yep.
Linda,
So
do you remember the days of 2 binders?
I got a word that we're okay. So towards the end of this, you'll see is the org code piece again. That's very similar to or is what you have up above in the org codes. And at the end, next tab, you have in H, you have the ED 279. That's the one we discussed. That's that formulaic piece. In tab I, you have the enrollment numbers again. And then, oh, mine skips one. I don't know if yours does. Apologize for that. That's when you get into the totals by object code. And so. Sure.
Yeah. Take a 5-minute recess.
I think we need to take a 5-minute recess if that's okay.
Just want to take a minute to say that we apologize for pausing the meeting. There was a disruption in the hall following the last agenda item. Inappropriate comments were made about the students who were courageous enough to present their point of view during the public session about policy. We believe in the value of student voice, amplifying that voice, and appreciate the students who have come forward to speak to the policies and procedures that impact their daily lives. We condemn the negative comments made towards students, especially as it relates to inequity, bias, and racism. The adult behavior and statements made about one's country of origin is insulting and will not be tolerated in our public sessions. We want to take a moment to thank the students. Thank you from me and also the entire school committee. Thank you for elevating your voice. We will continue to invite you to our sessions.
Thank you, Jake. We will continue with the budget presentation.
I'm gonna try to transition now. Transition back here. I think we were at a place where we were talking about the tabs in the back could be used if you want to use them to separate by article or anything like that. If we continue to get materials, we'll add them to it. And again, we keep some things live, if you will. I want to go back in the pack here for just a moment. You don't necessarily have to, but I want to mention that the revenue sheet, which is in tab D, on our side of things, that's a live sheet. So as we make adjustments, reductions, things of that nature, Adam and Bill go back to this sheet and they make adjustments accordingly with Munis, which is the term for the software we use for our budgeting process. It's essentially just it's a database that's what we use to help generate the budget with the accurate detail. And so at any point in time, maybe with a little break in time, we have the ability to know in almost real time or in very short order what a decision does for an impact. And so if hypothetically we bring to you a $200,000 reduction because we're able to find this, this, and this, and we want to present it to you, we'll also be able to calculate for you what impact that has on the tax rate and our overall expenditures. And that again connects right back to our revenues because it would decrease the ask of taxpayers. And so in that revenue line, we can go shrink that and it will start giving us the information. So that sheet there in tab D, again, it's not instant. There's some factoring that goes into a couple of steps, but we can give you in almost real time the impact that will have. And that'll be important, probably, not probably. So we have presentations this week and then also I think Monday next week is a big day. After that, we'll start bringing in things to you that are reductions once you've heard kind of the bulk of things. So tonight, we are looking at Articles 6 through 11. The slide up on the screen is just to guide us. And if we go into the thick portion of your budget, I can tell you what line Article 6 begins. It is 2,737. So if you go to line 2,737. The all the way to the left. Each line is numbered, and the bigger you're looking at the thick portion of the budget. Yeah. And then
It's page 75 out of like 100. So. I really did. I thought that was the only way I was going to be able to, but I did not spot that each line had different numbers.
I see the numbers as a good reference. The problem is if we take out an item, it changes your page numbers if we reprint, but if we're not reprinting, it's okay. It's a good reference. Oh, yeah. Of course. 2000, yeah. Went fast. You said that fast.
I didn't think of the, I thought the empty tabs were gonna get full, so that's why I did, but yeah, using them instead of Post-it.
So my thinking in, as we review this, so you have a level of detail that's line by line. I also have slides that point out some highlights from that particular area. What are some of the cost drivers? What's making this thing expensive? What are the increases? I didn't do every single line in the slides, but I have notes throughout my sheets for different items. I also have Karen, Bill, Sue, and Adam that can help answer questions that may come up. So my thinking again is to show you the highlights and leaving it up to you. We can go line by line at this point. We can do highlights and answer questions that you may have line by line. Many of you just got your binders, so I want to make sure that there's some think time too. We could also open our next meeting with what questions do you have about the articles we just recently covered. So I'm open to anything. We can speak to all the items. I just want to make sure that you have think time, process time, and the ability to answer, ask and get any question you have answered. Did I say that completely? Right, right. All right, so in Article 6, which is System Administration, you can see one of the first lines is a kind of a big number, but I just want to make note that there was a change in our charter that was voted on in referendum through the charter work. And so there's a shift in compensation, and that's reflected there in that number. Also, go ahead. The very first line of Article 6. Yep.
No, I just want to say I do have auditory processing issues. So if I don't have something on the stating a number or somewhere to look, I have a hard time following. So if I'm going to probably ask several times, and if only one person can speak at a time, so I'm not hearing several, that would be fantastic.
We'll either, okay, we'll appoint the council representative to be the one number. How's that?
I'm good with that. I do have a reputation and apologize ahead of time to the staff that, yeah, Linda's back and the work has been done.
We're ready. All right, so that's a big shift though. If you look at your percentages over to the right, you see a 233% increase. But again, I want to note that that was a charter decision that was voted on, but it's a big jump. And so we want to make sure we're speaking to those. In that, you'll see at this level of budget, anytime you see a salary increase, you see an increase in benefits and things like that. That's part of it because we have to pay bills connected to compensation. And so you'll see those transitions. Other things that you'll see in this particular article, and we've worked hard, very, very hard for those of you who were here last year, and probably all of you who were paying attention throughout the campaign process or what have you. We worked very hard to get our house in order. And I'm happy to say that we're staffed in our business and HR offices. It was a massive amount of work. And I know that the committee last year was very supportive of having us, giving us the time to figure out what we needed to do things right so that our house is in order. And we're there. There's still a lot of work to do because we have the right players on the team. But we are in a good position from that perspective. Having said that, there's some things there that grew from a compensation perspective because we hired people that have experience and who know how to do the job. And so you'll see those reflected in there. Legal fees, dues and contracts are all up. We're seeing the impacts of inflation. And as we project things out, we're seeing that have impacts on things. Legal fees were up a bit from some things that were some carryover, but those are trending in a good direction. Sure.
Thank you. Could you, can you tell me which line the legal fees are on? I'm sitting here looking for it and I'm not seeing it.
Main state retirement. Yeah, main state retirement system. Yeah.
So last year there was this discussion on this and nobody could figure out who had it. And it came out, it was me that I had contributed to retirement through. And so I'm curious, am I not contributing to retirement now? So if we could clarify that, not that everybody needs to know that I'm contributing, but I think that was only me that it affected, right, Megan?
Are you the benefits school committee? Like what's the benefits line?
So the benefits line
Okay.
question is that's Medicare and Social Security. We have a responsibility as an employer to pay that no matter what.
Okay.
Does that help?
Well, no.
No.
What line were you referencing?
The MSRS, so the 2741 line, where we're minus 100%. So that means that we're no longer paying retirement.
Last year, Tanya, somehow erroneously, it happened that Tanya was contributing to retirement, to main state retirement, but none of the rest of us ever had been. And when we picked that up, it was supposed to be removed. So it sounds like it's been removed. But then your checks should be different.
Have I been compensated? I don't know. I guess I need to talk with
Right.
HR.
This is the next
finance, or-
budget, so it wouldn't probably affect you until the next
Oh.
budget.
Okay, but I didn't change anything. So this is a conversation not for this table.
We could connect offline though to make sure you have what you need and that we're itemizing that accurately.
And that is.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of questions on Article 6, if I could. On the line number 2749, or how do you want to pronounce it? Do we say that like that line, or is that good enough?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's helpful because it's all sequential.
So that is the dues and fees of the school committee. I was just curious as to what fees we're paying for, and are we using any of those services if we're paying for like classes or anything like that, or?
Yeah, so the biggest one is we are part of the Maine School Board Association and their dues went up substantially this year. And that's what that reflects.
Wow.
But please note that that's also where we have access to those different legal documents, some
Right.
professional development. The presentation that we had back when you all were elected. Those are all part of those dues and fee structures. We do have people participate in the fall conference, and there's other bulletins and whatnot. So that's what that pays for.
Okay. Well, I just want to point out, I thought that that's what that was, but I think that we need to recognize as a school committee that we need to take advantage of them, take advantage of the knowledge that they have. And also, some of the legal stuff, all of that stuff, they can help us with all sorts of different things. So I think we need to make sure that we remember that that's there and we use it when we need to. So a couple other things.
Can I just add to that real quick too? Bill was just making mention that also in that you have things like the cost for referendum.
Okay.
We do have associated costs
Yep.
with the city around those things. Things like inauguration, we get a we have a
Little bit, yep.
contribution to that ceremony as part of the work. So that's all built into that.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple more on there. So just to clarify, when you see the 2782, that's a new HR department position, correct? Huh?
At the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
2782.
Is that just one position?
So that. So those aren't new positions. That's just reflecting actual salaries. We operated significantly below that threshold. Some positions went unhired in hindsight by choice. Not my choice per se, but went unhired by choice. And so we did that work in budgeting to make sure that it accurately reflects those positions being full and the salaries that they're at.
And one more question, please. So there's two different things here. So when we look at, so we knew on the school committee one where it says other professional services, that's the legal fees. Is that the same under the HR department titled the same thing?
No, and I'm going to look over my left shoulder because they can pull it up.
It's under 2794.
So
Linda.
I have, so a couple of notes on that I have while we wait for them. So just so people know that we've also found some corrections. So for example, further down in my bullets here, we have city costs that include tax software, administrative salaries. We pay a portion of certain members of the city staff for things that we also use. I put workplace compliance, but it's like Don Mayotte used to do it. It's like OSHA and workplace safety, those kinds of things. We pay a portion of that individual salary. We pay for, you'll hear it later in the business department, like the Munis software. You'll see an ad in our budget for that because it was not included. What we found in this work, and it looks like increases, pardon me, we've been paying these bills all along and they were not in our budget. And so this is that effort towards transparency now that we have staff in place so we can move forward with all of the information being included. So that's a big part of those corrections there. That's what that line is. That's city related costs that we pay in collaboration. But there is a fee structure for things that we use.
So is what, 2794? It says other professional services, HR.
Yeah, that's that line I was just speaking to with the city
Okay.
positions. Yep.
And just for clarification, I'm just kind of pointing out some of the stuff that's like the biggest, I see the biggest percentage, that sort of thing. So when we look at so salaries, that's 77,000, item 2812.
So again, that's where you get into when we hire people with experience, there's an uptick there.
Okay. And then the last one is 2823, contracted services business office. Would that be legal fees also? I don't know. I'm just trying to discern which each one is.
So that was one of those corrections. It was not in the budget. And so that's city, but do we know what the breakdown of that component is? I put city, was not in the budget in my notes, but I wanted to make sure.
30,000 of that line audit.
So the audit process is a big chunk of that.
And the rest of it are city fiscal services.
So city fiscal services. So this is what I was talking about when I said Munis. So that's the software we use. There's a server at the city that we have to patch things through. We pay a portion of that tech support. We pay a portion of the finance office, some of those salary positions. Again, it's our contribution to services that we use, but it's a cost to the school to use those services through the city.
I'm all set for that article.
maybe I missed it, but what is the insurance school committee line? It's proposed at $42,000, but I don't think any of us are eligible for insurance as school committee members. So why is that?
Legal liability for the districts. It's a premium.
Which means
We
it just
have
gets divided
we have
amongst
ins-
us for what.
we
the
have
district pays?
insurance that protects the school department. So like when we have a claim filed against us, it may require legal services and or settlements. And if that's the case, that's where that coverage comes out of. To which it's terrible example. It's like car insurance. We pay a premium and then we have a deductible if something comes up, but it has some protections in there if we have a big liability. Any others for Article 6? And we can always come back once again, I think it's important that you have a chance to digest this and give it a good look over. You might have second thoughts, what have you. Megan?
Two, 773. For travel, I'm just like, why was it such a big jump? Yeah, gas. I don't know.
When we run these projections, what happens too is salary kind of gets done over here. And so that appears on people's paychecks. So that got travel lines.
And just food for thought, we made corrections last year in like Karen as the assistant superintendent was in a different article, which didn't make sense. So it's not just Jake things, it's the office of the superintendent. So there's different folks and contracts there for different things.
So line 2763, are we no longer doing tuition reimbursement for our admins?
So we do. This is a correction in where it landed, where it should be. So
So that's specific to 3 staff members. So where we haven't had people that are asking for class costs.
So I know. I think there's a couple layers to that. One is people request in advance for tuition reimbursement. And so we have a good sense of what that might be. And right now we don't have much for people doing that. Right. No, because we didn't put funds in there last year. So 2 years in a row, nothing. So it shows a 0% change. But again, there's no funds in it.
But if you had someone that came to you and said, well, I'm going back to school, I want tuition reimbursement. So we're not able to do that for them this year or next year, I should say.
But you're only looking at 3 staff for the whole entire district. So that's not the tuition reimbursement line for the whole district. That's
Okay.
just for the superintendent's office.
Okay.
I feel like I want to repeat that. So just the question really is around the tuition piece and its administration, but we're in system administration. So really this would be myself, Karen, just a few people that might do something. I would say budgetarily, if that was an effort, that you would be aware of that anyway, and we would have to find a way to pay for it. But last time I checked, I don't really have time to go back to school. And so for right now, I think we can call that a budget savings. If I do ask you to go back to school, I want you to check on my wellness.
Yeah, just to point out, there are other lines, other tuition reimbursement lines in the other articles for
our building administration, our other district administration, teachers, ed techs. So it's not zero for everybody, it's just us.
Ms. Parks?
Maybe this is a stupid small thing, but I see it in a couple different places. Why have the telephone costs gone up so much?
So there's some more corrections there too. So we have a number of staff that, and it's various levels that have cell phones as part of the work that they do, up to and including like our head custodians who need them for different workplace things. And we weren't necessarily capturing all of those things. And so now we have them in the budget and representing what the actual costs are. You want to add to that, Bill? Or well, I wonder if he shouldn't be.
Because I get to sit next to Karen.
All right, well, you get to stand on the podium, my friend.
Does that not work? Okay.
You'll have to project yourself.
We'll see if the cable's long enough, but I can change it out real quick.
Okay. So just to add to that's a good, Megan, that you saw those. So with salary, with travel and phone, you'll see some adjustments there. And that is, again, the way that we did the budgeting, it's capturing what people are actually getting paid for a cell phone stipend and putting it into that line. And then you had a budgeted amount, which mainly was for our desk phones. So we're actually creating it better. And, we could see that there ends up being, I don't think a significant savings, but it ends up being $2,000 across the district, that the way that we're capturing it. So those lines are getting cell phones and desk phones captured, not just kind of lumping it together.
Ms. Eames?
Thank you. I had noticed a systematic diminishment of the workers' comp. And I was wondering if that was just because we were not in school as much, but I don't think that was true this year. So it was interesting to me that there was increase in travel, increase in phones, but seemed like decrease in workers' comp across the board.
So that's a projected figure that Adam did look at and get from the city, and that was an adjustment. So it did go down. I'm correct in saying that, right?
One of the other things too that we have found is when we go towards levels of transparency, I mentioned this last week when we did the introduction, that we have things that are, for example, in a paycheck. So you would see a little bit of travel, a phone thing. What we were finding is those things in the budget itself were not disaggregated to go put our fingers on them to know what they actually cost. So it looks like, so for example, if you said, hey, how much does this staff make if we had that conversation, we're then going to look at it, make sure they didn't have tuition reimbursement, that they don't have a phone, that they didn't have. And so we're trying to clean those things up so we know exactly what we have. So if you wanted to make a decision based on one of those factors, you would be able to draw that information out. Whereas before it was just kind of in the mix of salaries and some other spots. Other thoughts or questions on Article 6? I did have on my slide, I didn't share it just yet, but debt service was moved from facilities in Article 9 for Munis. So we used an LCIP many years ago to purchase Munis. It was a major undertaking. It's a big server, high cost for that piece of equipment, but also cost connected to the software itself and the carrying out the use of that. So for as long as I can remember, LCIP items, because it's capital improvement, always landed in facilities, because that, if you're fixing a roof or something like, it just makes sense. That's where it goes. Well, as we did the work with this, we realized that Munis and the software and the server really have nothing to do with facilities. And so we moved it. So that's the reason you see that change in system administration. There's other spots that pops up where we put the cost, or the expense where the expense belongs, like HR software and things of that nature. So it's not in an area where it really should not be. We just want to get better and better at that. So again, we know exactly what we have. So I'll slide to Article 7. Again, we can return to 6. You can always email questions. And we can also, I think, at any one of our budget meetings, feel free to bring up an article, an area, question that you have. If we don't have the answer, we will get it for you. So in Article 7, which starts at line 2838, that's school administration. Didn't have a lot of talking points on this particular area. You may have questions about some changes, but really that's contractual steps and insurance increases as we project out. And then also the high school athletic director and the assistant to Mr. Fuller, they've been moved to Article 4 because that's where it belongs. I don't know why it landed in school administration, because it's a other instruction area by way of article rules. That's just how it's supposed to be budgeted.
So a lot of these moves are just making sure that things land in the proper article, not that the cost changed in the overall budget. They're just reallocated in the proper section.
Right. These are not reductions in the overall, but they're movements between articles so that they're where they should be from an accuracy perspective with the state of Maine and NEO.
So that was the question I had, and I think it explains it right here. So, because the first salary line went up at every school except for the high school, which had that significant drop, and that's those two positions being moved to Article 4, right? Okay. And I
So
just had one
there's-
more question
There's
on that.
but there's also, when we have administrative turnover, sometimes experienced people that are top of scale step away and we hire at a different level. And so that's also a piece of that reduction at the high school.
And then the only other question I had in Article 7 was the travel expense for each principal seemed to go up significantly at every school. So I was just curious as to what that might be.
So the travel expense is following a similar situation as the phone. Principals by their contract, get a stipend for travel. And that wasn't something that we were necessarily factoring into that line. And so when we pulled all of the when we ran the budget this time, like I said, we did non-salary stuff kind of by hand more or less. And then salary, we had tables and it pulls all people's actual salaries. So when we saw those in there, we realized we probably aren't budgeting for the full amount for those travels. Same as the philosophy as the phones. So that's what's getting captured there.
Ms. Eames?
Just to follow up, does that mean that you've now put things in the budget that were not there before, or they were just elsewhere, hidden in the salary figures? And so it's kind of a wash.
So that particular thing would be something that we were paying that wasn't being reflected in the budget. That with that particular thing. Going back to the athletic director, it was kind of a wash. It was going down in this article, but Article 4 is increased.
So where was the money coming from that we were paying, but it wasn't in the budget anywhere?
So I would imagine that over the years, looking at the budget, like the fact that we had personnel positions that we weren't filling was probably absorbing that.
Which is a critical component. And so just so you know, the team that's kind of chiming in here, we're absolutely committed to reducing unnecessary unfilled positions. And I mean, a lot of them. The challenge to that, though, is if we don't have a clean, structured budget beforehand, we're cutting funds that have been used to cover these kinds of things, almost like a built-in rainy day. I'd rather it be accurate. And so we know what we have, we know what we might need to reduce, but the unfilled, open, multi-year positions, that work is heavy. But we want to make that as tight as we can. But to do that, we have to reflect these other costs that we've been paying the bill, kind of like the city items and the phones and whatnot. We've been paying the bill, but it was never itemized, not in the way it should be. So if we run it really tight on the other side of things with personnel, there is no room for error. We won't have it. And so that's good budgeting also, in my opinion.
Ms. Bowden?
Thank you. You might have said this, but there's so much being said right now that I missed it. Back to the travel for the principals, Farwell and Connors. I'm just wondering why Connors has a higher travel budget than Farwell.
They have more administrators. That's the initial piece. So Farwell has 2 administrators, Connors has 4.
Thank you.
Ms. Hurd?
Sorry to be hung up on this whole travel thing. But because I don't know, like, what is travel? Like, what is that, traveling from like different schools? Is that for professional development? What is that?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of several things, but primarily built into the collective bargaining agreement, administrators have travel that's issued to them or cost that's issued to them. It's part of their compensation. So it's called travel, but that doesn't necessarily all get, pennies and miles. It's a direct piece of their compensation. And so they get issued those funds. Now, if they travel outside of our district, they drive to Bangor and back or something like that for a conference, they could put in for mileage. And so some of this is projection.
Hang on, I might have skipped ahead. Yep, never mind. I skipped to 8.
Right, I will transition to Article 8. And that starts on line 3059. Article 8 is a pretty short article, but really this is student transportation. I'll hit my bullets, but then I want to speak to some of the lines. We have a multi-year contract with Hudson or Student Transportation of America. Sometimes you'll hear me say STA. So we have a multi-year contract with them. We're in year 2. Some of those things are just carved out in that multi-year contract, that growth. We also made a correction. Our Director of Nutrition and Transportation, they have both those responsibilities. So that's Alyssa Roman for us. She does a very good job. But there was this different split. It was like 70-30 or 80-20. I don't know what it was. Bill, do you recall? But we're moving it to be 50-50 because that's, from a article perspective, half of what she does in nutrition, the other half is transportation. And so we're trying to bill by articles accurately. There's a little subsidy component to this too, because nutrition as an entity is not something in your budget that you see asks on. Nutrition, because we are a CPE school, so long as we operate within our margins, and it's very tight, I'll be clear with you, it stays in the good. So they kind of operate using money that comes in through reimbursement, both state and federal dollars. So you don't see nutrition lines in here much beyond like Alyssa's salary or some things like that, because they're able to operate with the federal funds. We may incur some local costs if, for example, there's not enough participation from students that we can bill for reimbursement. We could get into that red area, but they've been able to operate in the black for several years now. And Alyssa does a great job keeping an eye on those numbers. The big one is out of district transportation. It's monumental. It is so expensive. If you look at it, line 3094. And as we talk more and more about special education, out of district placement. So out of district, just so you know, these are the students that by IEP have a level of need that we're not able to provide here locally. So we put them on a bus or in a van and they travel to wherever their programming is. Poland, Auburn, Saco, Brunswick, We have programs all over the place that students go to. But I want to make a point of emphasis here that when we talk about special education, part of what we're talking about are some potential savings in this line. If we program locally, we don't have to pay for that transportation out of district. But I'm going to say up front, potential savings, because we have so many students that are supposed to be at an out of district placement that are not because there's no placements for them. And so I don't want to, no smoke and mirrors with me. This line may reduce. There's potential for that if we can program in-house. The problem is the 50 kids, 50, 49, something to that effect, students that already should be outplaced that are not because there's nowhere for them to go would otherwise have an out-of-district transportation cost. So this is multifaceted, where we can find some savings if we do things in-house. We still have this level of need that we're not addressing because of the lack of placement elsewhere. So if those placements became available, again, those kids still need a ride. So I don't want you to think it's a 1-for-1 because the number of kids that we have that level of need. But I also wanted you to be fully aware that that is a massive cost.
It was that high in 2020, 2021, when most kids were remote. Do you know why it was so high then?
So interestingly, the special purpose private schools, they ran during COVID. So even though we were hybrid here, those kids still got on a bus and still went to their other schools. And actually, most, I think, if not all, still ran 5-day weeks. They didn't do hybrid. So those kids all still traveled.
But it was such a jump from the year before and then the year after. That 1 year jumped up really high. So in 1920, it was just under 800,000. And then in 2021, it jumped up to over 1 million. And then it went back down to under 800,000. And now it's going back up over 1 million again.
So part of what you're looking at there is in the 2021, the first one under column F, that was actuals. So we budgeted differently than, so we budgeted the 782, but the actual was 1.2. So now that's where you can start to see the adjustment to, now we, for 22, 23, we put in the 1.2 because it more accurately reflects what we spent. And we don't get a choice on those ones. If that cost is incurred connected to an IEP, we got to find a way to pay that bill. And I just as an add on transportation with specialties out of district placements, that is in places getting more expensive, not just because of fuel, but because of the labor shortage. For some of these kinds of rides, we actually contracted out differently than STA. Not all of it, but some of it. And so there's a market value to that transportation that we don't have control over.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, we don't need it right in the budget season, but after this, could we get a presentation on what, and I don't think we've had this presentation before, but what services we are not able to provide? So we have an understanding. That would be helpful.
You'll actually get some of that during this budget process when I believe it's next Monday when we have our special ed director present. But you'll get some of that. And I would bet if you don't get it, what you're looking for, we can certainly make sure that happens.
Ms. Scott?
Thank you. So when we look at the beginning of the transportation article, I mean, my first thought, and I just was hoping for an explanation, every single line there is a negative, right? We're looking at student transportation for alternative education, summer programming, summer transportation, preschool transport. What's happened with the cost on those things?
Summer school is not included in this budget.
This is a huge conversation, which is, I thought that was going to be your answer. And I find this extremely concerning because it's not in this budget and we still have a budget we're looking at having to cut. Yeah. Okay.
Significantly. Yeah.
Significantly cut. Right.
And we've been able to, as Karen mentioned last time, we've been able to sustain summer school using some Easter funds or CRF funds early on, but also, as Sue mentioned last time, we had some Title I reallocation funds that were available for the state. We just had to apply. It's a bit of labor for us to do the application to submit it, but last year we were awarded that. And we'll continue to ask for it if it's available. It's a gamble, because if those funds are not there, and when the federal funds sunset, we will have no check to pay that bill.
And we're looking at upwards to, it's over $1 million, right? I mean, and more than that, even almost $2 million in cost.
Summer school can get costly, and from a breakdown perspective, transportation obviously is a factor, but staffing is a big factor as well as supplies. But we also have, there's different ways to break it out. So summer school is a piece, but also we have the ESY, or the extended school year.
Right.
That's just the language used for special education summer school. So those cost breakdowns are different and separate in the budget, but we do have the ESY items in the budget, and the regular summer school, if you will, is not.
And then if I look at line 3077, transportation regular salaries, is that part of the contract conversation you were talking about? Because that's an increase of 53,909.
That's the director, where he talked about we were splitting it 50-50. So we moved, we moved more of a percentage to this budget.
That's what I was thinking, because you have all the MSRS stuff on the other page. But how about the line 3083, student transportation regular? Again, that's significant budgeted over but we've got zero this year. Is that correct? Increase, right?
Yep.
Zero increase, yeah.
Okay.
And we do, just because I think it's important from a fiscally responsible perspective, while we have this contract with Hudson for our transportation, when rides don't run, we do not pay for them. So that's when we get into this conversation 12 months from now, we'll be talking about some savings from the current year in fund balance conversations of buses that did not run.
And every Wednesday last year, when we didn't have students in school, we were not charged for those runs. So that shows as a savings in what we actually spent.
Ms. Bowden?
Thank you. Could you explain the 2021 budgeted for, let me go to line here. It's the student transportation for pre-K. So it's 3067 and down. So it shows that we were at in 1819, almost 500,000, 1920, about 550,000. And then in 2021, we were down, even though we budgeted for 609,000, we were down to 153,000 actual. Is that because of COVID? Did we not have pre-K?
Directly because of COVID. There's a few factors, having less pre-K, but also a lot of families chose to not include their kids in pre-K because of the pandemic. So we actually had pretty low enrollment numbers. We had less kids to bus, less buses needed to run them.
So you anticipate it going back up then?
Oh, the numbers are already back up.
We only had one session last year. So students only came, so we didn't, and normally outside of COVID, we have two sessions. So we have a morning and an afternoon session. So we run a bus in the morning, midday, and then again in the afternoon for pre-K. And we only had one session. So we ran a bus in the morning and then early afternoon when kids were dismissed. So it was less runs.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a great question, because that was connected to that hybrid schedule we adopted. It shrunk the day some to give teachers some time to do some things. So part of that shrinking of the day made it so that we couldn't have afternoon sessions of pre-K. But again, our numbers were significantly down. Those have rebounded.
Ms. Parks?
This is a question I've thought of before, but then I never remember to ask. When something is not used that's budgeted, like transportation, and that goes into the fund balance, does it go into the fund balance and then can only be used for transportation moving forward, or does it go into a general fund?
So the way the fund balance moves forward, and if we do, people mind flipping back to the revenue chart? I want you to have that connection to how the funding moves. So if you go to tab D. So in tab D, that's our revenue budget. And then within the revenue budget, so where does the money come in? And I'm looking for it right now. So if you go where am I? I've looked at this thing so much, it's, yeah, it's 5 million. Am I looking over here? Yeah, so you see fund balance right in the middle of the page. It says total other above it and total general fund below it. So you can see there that last year, 2021-22, we used $5 million of unspent funds that were in the fund balance carryover. And so this year, we're projecting to use the same amount. But I will say, and I mentioned last time, that last year we had 5.9 to work with, and we wanted to be smart to save that 900,000. This year we have 7.7 in available funds, but we do not want to spend all of that because of what it means down the road. It kind of artificially supplants your budget. So if you don't have it in a future year, that's a direct cut you have to make. Or you ask the taxpayers, which I don't think anybody here wants to do. And so that 5 million is a responsible number with the intent to reduce that year after year. So we get back to a healthy fund balance carryover. And I don't want to overload you with information, but this is what we mentioned last time with the state has criteria for how much fund balance you can have and carry over. It's currently set at 9%. And this is a one-time only thing. And it's going to tier out the next 4 years to get back to 5%. Is it 5 or 4? 5%. So, and this is because of Easter funds and just unfilled positions. The state has realized that many school districts like ours, we couldn't spend all the money because we couldn't hire enough people, because the buses didn't run every day, and because we use federal dollars to do things like buy supplies. So this is that kind of carefully woven project or process to get back to more reasonable fund balance use in the future. Now, fund balance use, think of that as money coming in. Now it's already money that's been approved, but we're using that $5 million like it's money coming into our house to pay for bills. All right, so that's what that $5 million is. If we don't use that, it's usually more money requested from the taxpayers. So I walk this thin line of, could we use the 7.7 million and save locally on a potential tax increase? We could. But in year 2 of that, anything you don't have at that level, let's say we have a $5 million fund balance carryover. Before we even talk about insurance rates and contract steps, we would be 2.7 or more, depending on what we have for fund balance, in the hole. And that's not a position we want to be in. That's when we talk about the cliff. We're talking about that ratio of fund balance, local request, and realistically, from a projection, a shortfall of state money that's not going to grow as fast as inflation does. So those are all factors. So that $5 million number, I think, is responsible this year, even though we have more than that. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about fund balance and carryover and how that has down the road liabilities for us as far as revenue is concerned.
Jake, since
Sure.
we're on this page, looking at the top debt service, it
Yep.
lists Farwell, Geiger, and Connors, but I don't see the new piece of the high school nor the old piece of the middle school.
So we collapsed last year. We broke that out because we wanted people to know that this was referendum passed in such a big number. It does exist in here, but it's under local only debt service. And so for 22-23, you see, and this is where I am, just to give you an idea from a reference. It's 2,013,000. And that's that local only. So something that was approved via referendum locally that, hey, as a community, we're going to pay this mortgage. That's where that is. And so that's that number. The projects above it, those were state funded, and that's why they're separate.
The one additional local, which you have 7.8 next year.
So that additional local, that's the magic number. That's how much are we asking for our community? And the additional local is that metric of the state says this much, anything you add in addition to is that ask of the taxpayers. So you can see why I'm not having light conversations about reductions. I'm having very serious conversations about reductions.
We're still on 8, right?
Yes.
Maybe I missed this. A few things on the second page of Article 8.
Yep.
It shows like the ER match support, $2007 from 0 last year. The amount of change is 2007, but then it shows a 0% change. And there's several of those that are like that. The telephone, supplies, general, there, it shows that there is a change, but then it shows 0% change.
I see that.
Yeah, so
Is that?
that's just the way Excel does it.
Oh,
Right.
You could just as easily have it in any symbol next to it.
Right, you
from zero.
can't divide into the 0.
so even though there's a change,
It's formulaic, yeah.
Correct.
So what
It's Excel that's doing that.
Okay.
So
what the spreadsheet is doing to derive that, it's dividing by the prior year
which is 0.
or vice versa. And there is no other number to do the division. So
So how does
that's
that
why,
work? Like when we add a position, it would have been 0 the year before, but now, so that's going to reflect no change?
but you had other positions, so there would be a metric to divide off of. Whereas this one, there's no number at
Okay.
all. So,
All right.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't
It's-
work that way.
no, it's a good question though, because those do have changes. He works the other way too. So if you look at line 3088. Oh, sorry, bad example. I thought there was nothing before it.
if we put a 1 in there, like in FY 22 budget, if we put a 1 in there, then you'd get
It would do the
a
math.
huge increase. So again, it's an Excel formula, not being able to read it, and it gives you like the REF. So, it's 100% increase, I guess, is probably the best way to just look at those.
Are there any of those that are really significant that we should notice? Or are they all just small like that?
That, yeah, the dollar amount is the big thing to be looking at.
No way to give you a percentage.
So we should watch for the amount change more than the percentage change. Perfect, thank you.
Well, it's kind of both, but if you see 0, it could be that there was just no prior number to, right? Or there's nothing now, but there was a number before. That would also still come out as 0.
I'm wondering if we can go back to D again, in the example you were using on the additional local.
Yeah.
So in 2018, 2019, we had 0. 2019, 2020, we had 1,328,000. 2020 to 2021, we had 214. This is all, and then, this is crazy. 2021 to 2022, we had 800,000. And then this year, we're asking for 7 million,
Where,
right? Additional local,
what line?
that's,
She's on the
that's
revenue.
on D on your
Oh,
chart.
you're in the revenue. Okay.
Uh-huh.
We're back on Article 8.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I went back to section D is what
Yeah.
I said.
Yeah.
And because you had talked about the lines before that, and
Sure.
I started focusing on that line. And I think that that's a big
Yeah.
part of the conversation too,
Oh, absolutely.
right? I mean, we need to have
That is the
city
critical piece.
council, everybody recognize what that line says right there is huge, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So,
Linda,
So-
can you repeat
hold
which
on, I can
line?
show
Because we
you.
weren't all there. We were at that different.
so
section.
I'm in section D on the page that has the Lewiston Public Schools fiscal year 23 revenue budget, that one page. And then when we go a quarter of the way down under minimum local 15671A, the additional local line.
And so the minimum local is when the state gives you their subsidy numbers. That's what they say that minimum local number is. We never want to get below that because of the $3 impact we talked about last time.
Mhm.
But the 7,806,000 number, That when I talk about reductions, that's what I'm talking about. And so the way that figure gets generated, you take all your expenses and you subtract all your revenues, and then whatever's left at the end of all of that conversation is a local tax burden. And so that's why when I say we need to reduce, I am as serious can be. Substantial reductions.
So I don't disagree. We have to reduce
Absolutely.
substantially
Yeah.
because this affects our mill rate taxes. We all know this.
That
But
is
when-
that exact
Right? Yeah.
factor. Yeah.
But when we look at, this is actually what our community paid, correct? Am I correct in saying that our community paid in 2020, 2021, local share was $214,000? Is that correct?
That's
In addition to the
over-
local
yeah.
minimum share. Yeah, which is just above it. Two lines above. So in 2021, when you look at the 214, that was 214,000 and change above the 18.5. And then last year it was 815 above the 18.3. Now, I want you to see that trend. If you look at that, go to 2021, it's 18.5 for the local minimum. Then it went down to 18.3.
Mm-hmm.
That hurts our purse.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the next year, which is now, it goes from 18.3 to 17.1. So the problem that we have from an overall revenue perspective, the state increased its percentage of contribution and subsidy, but in doing so, drove down the request for local minimum share. And remember, Potvin probably remembers these conversations from last year, but the problem that we have when we drive down local and the state subsidy doesn't go up enough, our contracts alone outpace subsidy, period. People just get their contracted step. We have the insurance conversation and it outpaces funding. So this
Okay.
is why when we talk about things like summer school, and listen, it's a painful conversation for me too. I know how our kids benefit, but we start having those very difficult conversations around, is it summer school or is it the during the year teacher? And so I'm choosing summer school, and I've got some ideas with some other significant cuts that we're going to be able to bring to you.
Just a reference.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that as she's. I just think it's important to note as you're discussing what was required of additional local, and you see that dramatic drop off in 2021, that was directly associated to COVID and the school department's commitment to help the city get through that. So I wasn't crazy about it because I knew that we were basically taking money away that we needed. However, the city priority kind of took place. So that's why you see such a dramatic drop off. And that number really shouldn't, it's artificial. So, I mean, getting back to a normal number of additional local is going to put you more in a better standing. So I just wanted to point that out because it is an important piece as you're looking at that line. Yep.
So when I'm doing I'm in my office and I'm reviewing these line for line and looking at all the ways in which I think we can reduce. One of the frameworks I build off of is if we maintained the level of funding we had last year, what does that look like? What does a small increase look like? What is the next level increase? And we as a team are starting to tier those things out. And you can see the level of, when I say reductions, I'm not talking about, we're not going to buy pencils. I'm talking about every one of those open positions that's unfilled, that has been for multiple years. If we can live without it, we are going to.
Ms. Bowden.
Thank you. Could I request like a quick 2-minute break?
Dave, we're going to go to recess for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
We're still on Article 8.
All right. We just took a quick break, choose the restroom and what have you, get some air, and we're back. We had just gone through Article 8. Were there any more questions on Article 8 from during the break, or are we all set to move to Article 9? Okay. So Article 9 is facilities and maintenance, and our facilities director, Josh Bro, is here. Some things that we are looking at. I think a big one is some corrections. There were some things from the high school that were double entered. And one question as we tried to track it back was, did prior personnel double enter things because of the expansion? Because there were some expansion specific costs, and it would have been very easy to plug those numbers in two spots when you have 10,000 lines to look at. So we're able to sort that out through our process and make those corrections. So you'll see those. Looking at Article 9, which it starts on line 3098. Some other things too, while we have some pricing locked in, there's still some concerns around inflation and utilities. There's also a spot, you'll notice, it's actually under the Dingley building, but we've narrowed that to be an increase connected to a district-wide camera project that is in its fourth phase of 4 phases, connected to our safety audit. But when those LCIP funds were approved, the project costs over time grew. And so that's one way we're looking at trying to make sure we finish the project. But you'll see it in that space. I want to see if we can do something maybe with this year's funding. So that's one of those items. Let's see, I can tell you.
Three, 4, 11. 34, 11.
That was gonna take me a while.
237%.
So that's that big item. Yeah.
That's
But
the
we're
what?
gonna-
What is it?
It's actually not a Dingley specific cost. It's part of a multi-year camera phase-in project.
Okay.
And so that's that request would be closing that out. Josh, I know Bill stole the mic, but if there's anything you want to chime in or add, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, come on over.
Can I ask a question?
I knew you wouldn't pass up the opportunity for a mic. You know me.
Me? I see that the oil has been budgeted 50% increase, but I'm worried that maybe that's not going to be enough.
Which line are you referring to?
Oil. She's talking about fuel. in general.
3176. No, 3177. I see that there's been a budget increase for the price of oil, which is good, but given what's happening right now, I didn't know if we should anticipate a bigger increase.
It might be wise to raise that up another 20, 25% or something like that, but it's hard to forecast exactly where we'll fall. Yep, and that is specific to a building. There's only a handful of our buildings that actually use oil currently. Most everything else is on natural gas, but that's also volatile commodity.
Why does the high school show that we didn't use oil, and did we just put in something new at the high school that uses oil?
A generator.
Thank you.
Just heard.
Thank you. Is the improvements for the lead in the water in this article?
No, so those aren't in here. We're looking at some potential for grant funding. And also Josh and his team are continuing to do the follow-up tests with the lab and the state requirements. So we will know more about mitigation planning as we get further down the road, but that's not in here specifically.
Correct.
Speak to that. I'll also add that there's more and more conversation at the state level through this process that has a whole lot of people concerned. There's a concern that we have gone down a path with too narrow a spec or the parts per million. up to and including, I think I've mentioned this prior, but up to and including, I don't know the name of the position, but the person who testified with the legislature when they made it law, who was at that point considered the lead for the state as far as water quality was carried out professionally. This is what he did. And he recommended against the parts per million cutoff. He thought it was far too narrow. And so there's a lot of things in play right now. So we continue to monitor what our remediation plan will be. But we'll have some things to bring to you. But no, without knowing what that is, we don't have that in here. And we're looking at some funding to help with any efforts that's outside of this budget.
I do also want to clarify, going back to the camera question, we did put the money in Dingley's budget this year for district-wide camera project. Just to give you a kind of a quick recap, that project was awarded to a contractor who bid $1.3 million. We had approximately $800,050 in our budget to get that done. So what you see in Dingley for this year would be duplicated in the 23-24 budget as well, to finish that off as well. We're in, like Jake said, phase 4, but if you consider all of that work, phase 1 in this budget is phase 2, and then phase 3 would be the year after. And we worked with our contractor that won that bid to pull pieces out that we could use down the road, that we could do down the road. Those items are specifically, or in generally, I should say, the light poles that we wanted to add to some of our properties based on the TRC report, including a camera mounted to that light pole. So things like that, where we are adding additional devices, we push to the back side of the agreement we have with them to focus on getting our building access control system up and running, getting our new program that runs the access controls and the cameras up and running, and then start replacing actual devices on site now that are either failing or very old and poor quality, so they are basically ineffective. So the primary push is to replace what we have and get the new system running, and then add the additional items identified by the TRC audit in the follow-up years.
Thank you. So I kind of flipped to the end of Article 9, and it talks about Dingley. And I guess I'm just seeing like, there's nothing proposed for this year, which I get. I'm just wondering, is the roof gonna hold up over this next year?
So we have LCIP funds for the capital improvements at the Dingley building. And so those funds are not in the general fund, but they have been appropriated to do that work.
All right, so I do have a couple of questions. So when we look at the operating cost of building, like 3106 is operation of building at Farwell, and we see an increase there of 13,200. And we see that's kind of the same amongst all the schools. That same particular, I'm looking at just like the total cost, they each have a significant, except for Montello, and that's what my curiosity was. So, because we see for your water and sewer and all of that, right, your total on 3106 for Farwell would be, it's up 11.8%. And then I go to Connors, it's 7.8. Now, and this seems normal to me, electricity, gas, right, all those things. But which one was it? Montello? Montello's like only at 0.7%. I mean, it's like really low. So I was curious about that. And that's line 3139 or 3140, something like that. Sorry, 3140.
So more than likely, if that's an 054300 account, what that means is there was significantly more project work planned in that building last year or in our current year versus what we're planning to do in the next fiscal year.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
So it also shows that there's no increase in electricity or oil for Montello. Why is it staying the same there when it's increasing everywhere else?
I think if you look at the historical consumption data, that'll justify that. So I think what we're doing is course correction at certain schools that needed it and leaving Montello alone because they're doing better than anticipated.
Okay. And then if I look at like, so the operation of the Lewiston High School, which is 3170, that's that significant, there's a big correction there.
That's that correction. Yeah.
That's that one.
Those
Okay.
numbers were all entered twice.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure of. And then on the custodial, the increase in custodial, again, across the board, is that for salary increases, insurance, all of that stuff?
It is. And then, of course, we have the new wing at the high school, so that position's.
That's,
rolled in
I
there.
saw that, okay. And I just want to clarify that because if somebody out in the public takes a look at our book and sees these significant increases in percentage, they always ask questions. So I want to make sure that we're putting that out there and being transparent about those costs. And then, so Longley School, so I've been away from the school committee for a few years. What's going on at Longley? Because we see a significant reduction in a custodial cost. It seems like some of the, I just was wondering what do we have happening at Longley School right now?
Yeah, so great question. And I'd like to brag about it a little bit because of where things are at. But so in the top left section of the building, we have our adult education programming. On the right hand or the right half of the building from the cafeteria over, on that main floor, we have our next step programming. We're also using some modulars, one of them for our multilingual center, which is a director of ELL and two assistant directors, two staff to support community work and translation interpretation and an assistant. And then the downstairs, which we have invested in significantly over the last 12 months, has all been cleaned up and is now the home of our store next door. And that's very close to being done. So we're excited about that.
Thank you. And then, okay, so now going to the care, upkeep, equipment, repair, maintenance, zero on everything. That's line 3338. Pretty much that whole page, all the way down to when we get to the ground maintenance stuff. Is that stuff that got moved or there's nothing in there and there hasn't been for many years? So is that just something we still have in there from old? I mean, the last numbers in there, 2019, 2020.
Yeah,
So I'm
so
just wondering,
those funds have been moved to different accounts.
Okay.
We had a lot of historically inactive accounts and facilities that we need to call out. So I think what we've done is very much on theme with the entire budget is getting the buckets of money in the appropriate buckets instead of spending them from, it's always been here and that's where we've always pulled from, even though it doesn't make sense. Now we're trying to make it make sense.
and would that go along with the whole section on the building security? Contracted services, building security, Montel, I mean, there's several, that's on, starting with 3419.
Josh, that's all the
It's all
1065,
dis-
1066 totals.
Yeah. But it's budget neutral. There's no percentage increase or decrease there. Is that sufficient on building security?
I believe so.
Okay.
Josh, is that software or licensing?
I'd have to dig into Munis to see exactly what we've been spending that money on.
Adam will check, and if we have it tonight, we'll share it, and if not, we'll bring it back to you.
That's fine. Thank you. That's all I had for that article. Thanks.
I had a question about where we were talking about like grounds maintenance and that kind of stuff. Snow removal, like, is that, I didn't see like a line item for like snow removal or like, how does that all?
I don't know the exact line item because it is worded very specifically, but there are two ground service accounts. One is primarily the high school and I believe Longley, and then the rest is the middle school and all the elementary schools. So my admin assistant who codes all the bills as they come in and then brings them to me for signatures to approve them, she puts those two codes appropriately on those bills as they come in. And historically speaking, we had a couple of really curve busters before I started here 3.5 years ago. We've been pretty lucky with the last handful of winters, but we're still using a fairly safe number when it comes to snow removal, because we're gonna get that winter where we get a ton of snow and we're gonna need that money there. So typically what we're doing is anything that we save on snow plowing, we do try and invest it into similar themed items, whether that's landscaping or things of that nature that we don't have enough money for. We generally speaking, try and find a way to maximize that money without bringing that budget all the way to zero every year. So.
Okay, and then on kind of like piggybacking on that, I know we've had conversations before and you and I have had conversations about like the sidewalk maintenance, especially like in front of the schools where we have so many people, like so many kids walking and kids getting dropped off and like that kind of stuff. Like, I guess like whose responsibility is where and where does that?
So we take care of the school grounds. Anything beyond that is the city.
Okay,
And we do separate out some of those costs, like Josh was mentioning, connected to subsidy for CTE or LRTC. So there's funding in there in our revenues that we can expend connected to their grounds and maintenance, and it's a separate pot. So that's why we have some pieces of it segmented out separately as a campus. We can find the numbers for you though. But as far as sidewalks go, so like on this campus, it would be up to the edge of the road, and then that roadway, crosswalk, all of that would be city.
And we do have a LCIP in this year's budget that was approved for FY22 for just over $500,000 for district-wide paving improvements to address some of those concerns district-wide. And whether that's an entrance to a parking lot, something in the parking lot, a walkway, we're going to be working this spring with the city to help put a bid together to get out to request for some proposals to get out there and fix those items.
That whole discussion about sidewalks in the city of Lewiston been going on for I was on planning for 11 years and I've been off of there for almost 4, and it started long before I ever was on planning, and it's never been properly funded. It's been an ongoing issue. In some neighborhoods, it's worse than others, but the sidewalks just have never really been appropriately cared for. But that's at least a 15-year-old discussion. And the ones that weren't fixed 15 years ago are really not in good shape.
And I think the labor shortage has exacerbated that. I think both for our facilities crew that's operating very light. They're doing a good job, but they're light. And also I know the city is trying to hire for those positions also.
I just want to say that when we look at the number of schools that we have and when we look at our facilities budget and we see only an increase of $434,000, that's actually quite low. And when we have the number of needs that are needed in all of our schools, I mean, to me, that's significantly low. And we don't know what's going to happen with our economy, with gas, with electric. And so bravo, but I wish we could give you more because that seems really low for a whole bunch of buildings to be taken care of.
I will gladly take whatever you want to give me. However, I will say that in addition to this general fund budget, we've used ESSER funds, CRF funds. So we've been finding some creative ways to stretch the limited funds we do get from the taxpayers in the city by chasing some of those grants and working with upper administration to fight that fight and fight for the things that we need and getting a lot of those long overdue projects taken care of with the funds we do have. But it's never enough. We could spend everything you could throw at me. Not that I have enough time to get it all done, but we could spend everything you could throw at me.
All right, Article 10. Article 10 is very straightforward. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. Article 10 is just debt service. And so that starts on line 3530. And this is all pretty straightforward. We continue to pay our bills and our debt service is reducing. And so as you look at line 3572, you can see that it's down $329,000+ because we're paying our principals down. So that one's pretty straightforward. And to be honest, if it was up, which we had some things up last year because of the referendum approval of the expansion. There's not a lot we can do because again, those are state funded and or local referendum passed. But it's down, so we don't have to worry about that one. That's a good thing. Any questions on debt service? Article 11 is, it starts 3573, line 3573, and it's a crossing guard. I've seen this in our budget for a decade, and I don't think the number has really shifted much, but for some reason by article rule, that lands in Article 11 under other.
Question. I do have a question about that.
Sure.
So like I had said, a couple may already know, the crazy Linda watched all of last year's budget meetings over the weekend because I wanted to see the conversations, and I really appreciate some of the conversations that were had. But it did bring up a couple of questions for me on this year. And one of those was the crossing guards, because I saw that was brought up specifically last year and about how it was used. Are we still using them? And I'm just wondering if there was any discussion further on that, because I didn't notice any other discussion on that, especially with COVID and with everything going on. I mean, I don't want to eliminate this. I was just curious.
The crossing guard thing, and I could do some more research to freshen my thinking on it, but it's complex in that there's like traffic certifications and things like that go with it. It's not just necessarily a volunteer anymore. And so part of that is a liability on crossing guards. And so this is how this number starts to play into that conversation. So I don't think this is like a salary for a person. This is more about the liability and the requirements of anybody operating as a crossing guard. It's more of a district protection.
That makes more sense, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of my question as well. I was wondering if it was a salary, because I see numerous crossing guards daily when I'm picking up and dropping off my kids. So I was hoping that wasn't a salary for all of them combined. Okay, so that makes sense. So it's more of an insurance. Thank you.
So are you saying our crossing guards aren't paid?
It functions differently.
Paid by the city and we're invoiced.
Oh, okay.
And that's why it lands in Article 11 under other, because from a school function perspective, it doesn't land in an article because of that structure. That was what we had on our agenda for tonight. I do have here, just on the slide, it says break. And in our next session, we'll be covering Articles 1, 4, and 5. Article 1 being regular instruction. It is a massive component of our budget and the work that we do. We'll have some principals joining us and directors to share some pieces. But the pieces they're sharing are all aligned to the goals that we've talked about. And so we'll talk about Articles 1, 4, and 5 on Wednesday. If you have any questions between now and then, please get them into us. We will field what we can and keep a list going. And please remember, and I'm seeing a couple of hands now, but please also remember, as you have a chance to digest this and bring your book home and look at it, and you start hearing other pieces of the puzzle, we can always jump back to a different space to answer any question you may have.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm doing all the talking tonight. So I do have some questions, and I figured I'd just bring them tonight. That way you could, we don't have to have it tonight, but so that we can have a little bit more information moving forward. So a couple of things I was thinking about is if we can get the enrollment totals from last year to compare to this year. So you have the totals, but I think that we should probably have actually more than just last year if we can possibly have it, because I know that the discussion has been that the totals went down last year, but we're up this year. So I think that's going to be an important piece to this. So another question I had was, what are the specific compliance costs with the Department of Justice and Department of Labor? Tell me if you're ready for another one. Classroom materials and supplies. When does the emergency pandemic funds sunset on that? And have we included that in this year's budget?
So I can chime in on that one quickly if it's all right with everyone. So ESER 2 and ESER 3 end in, not this fall, but we have next year essentially from a budgeting perspective. So those will sunset a year out. So this time next year, we'll be talking about how those funds will be done. But right now we have another year. And what we've done this year is we've rolled back a portion of what was pushed to that last year. At the end of our budget cycle, we had to push a number of things out to that funding source. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. So kind of like that conversation around the fund balance use, we want to be responsible with that. Putting those items back in our budget now will ensure that our teachers have the materials they need moving forward. If we don't add them, we may have teachers where they will have no materials to work with.
Thank you. Okay, and then on the enrollment increase this year, how many of those students have been identified to need ELL services? So I think you had said we had an additional 413 students this year. I'm wondering if we know the breakdown on that also. And like I said, we can have it when we have that conversation, but. And let me see here. Of the list of newly requested items that you had talked about in your memo that have been starred as being funded by relief funds, I guess I kind of want a little bit more clarification on, and actually a more conversation around that, so we understand exactly what is in our budget, what has already been removed, what we might have to talk about. There are some significant things in that list, particularly the social emotional learning. I'm very concerned about that in the summer school, so I think we need to have a more extensive conversation around that.
I want to frame it well. Would you like a presentation on what things, we can almost take an approach of looking at the ESERF budget so you can see what things are in there, and that will tell you at what amounts and at what levels and what they are. And that will give you a fuller picture of ESERF, not just the items that people said, hey, I'd like this in the regular budget. And I said, not this year because we just can't afford it.
No, I like that idea. I think that would work well. And then another thing that I was thinking about, like I said, I watched the meetings from last year. And so there were a number of things that were added back into the budget. And I'm wondering, and there was conversation around looking at programming and how effective it has been over the last couple of years. And I'm wondering if we can include some of that conversation when we're talking about these different programs. Not that I want to eliminate anything, but I think it's important that our community understands how important some of these programs are. And if we're fighting for something or we're making massive cuts, we need the information to fight with that. So that's it for now.
Ms. Eames.
It's my first cycle, so I don't know what's coming. So we're going to go through these articles. And at some point, we're going to either be told or asked to cut something. And I'm just wondering how that unfolds. Some of you have been through it before, but I haven't.
I think it's a good question, and then it can go in a few different ways. This is the first time we've approached it this way,
Yeah.
which with me anyway. And I think that I feel like this is a more responsible way to do it because of the transparency of what's in and what's out. What I will be doing with our team is bringing things to you for consideration. I'm also always all ears with recommendations you may have. We're already crafting a list of reductions, so that work is happening behind the scenes. And my thinking was get all of these things out in front of you and then have the reduction conversation. But again, I'm not blind to, you may have an idea that I'm not thinking about and I want to hear those. But I've really, Linda talked about watching all the meetings last year, and I think they play in my head just reflectively as part of the work that I do. But I guess I want to note that I don't want you all to be in a position of saying last minute in the 11th hour, here's a list of things that nobody can say no to when we think about our kids. I really want to avoid that conversation where you feel like you're stuck voting on a 50, 60 item list of things that, how do I say no to getting a kid to and from school? How do I say no to the after-school program? How do I say no to summer school? I think collectively, we all want all things, but we have to be responsible and then maximize the funds that we have available. So to your point, but also I wanted to say more about that, we as a team will be bringing things to you that are significant reductions. It's still going to be hard. And as we move forward, the passion points and the tough decisions we have to make will be about a responsible budget we can take to the city. And I say this with hesitance, but it won't be about what feels like a wish list process. And that's hard to say because we all want these things for all of our kids, but we have to have a balance between the two, and it has to have a multi-year calculation. So that's my thinking on that.
Okay. As we're approaching the dog catcher hour here.
Microphone.
Item 7 is report from school chair. I really don't have anything right now. There's a lot to digest here, but we'll have more going forward. Oh, there is, March 24th, there is going to be an open house and sort of a dedication of the art wing. It's from 5 to 7 at the high school. Hopefully, folks can attend. As we've talked, it's 5 years in the making after 45 years of waiting. So, to be able to celebrate that finally after almost 50 years, I think it's important for the community. So, well, I'll ask to make sure that there's at least coffee. How's that? I just. But other than that, I think, negotiations continue, as Tanya will probably address at some point, but we're slow progress, slow being the operative word. Superintendent report.
Right now, I'm just focused on budget. If there are other updates, I'll shoot you an email, make sure you're in the loop of things. And short of that, thank you all for your questions and your hard work.
Item 9 falls to Ms. Scott.
So City Council did have a meeting last week. We had a workshop discussing our revaluation. It was just an overview. It's still not happening yet. It's still a couple of years in the process because it is a process. So yeah, it was just an overview at this point. We also had our annual comprehensive financial report presentation. And there were some comments in that report about the school department. And I've already spoken to Jake about this. Janet and I are on the finance committee together, and we're meeting with Bill and Adam tomorrow afternoon to talk about that. So we'll have a little bit more clarity on all of that. And then the city council did do their final passage of ordinances on the licensing of marijuana businesses, and we received and approved our recommendations for the fiscal year 23 LCIP and adopted the fiscal year 23 LCIP. We have a city council meeting tomorrow evening. It's a workshop. It's going to be a report on the full analysis report on the fire department. Very fascinating. I read that this weekend. It was a pretty hefty stuff, but I think it's going to be a good conversation. And then we're also going to be having a discussion again on the rental registration policy that had been discussed a couple of years ago, but was put on hold after COVID. And now the city is talking about putting that back together and going back there.
What does
And
that mean? Rental what?
So landlords to register their buildings so that there's a way for the city and code enforcement to get a hold of some of these landlords if there's something that happens. I think this is a really important thing. I'm going to just say what I'm going to reiterate to the city council tomorrow evening. And I think it's really important. We're in budget season right now. And again, I'll bring up what I saw last year. I do not want that to happen again. We need open conversation. We need open understanding. We need to keep the phone lines completely open and have those discussions. I would highly recommend taking the time to watch the city council discussions on the budget. And I'm going to suggest, and if you can, come to some of the meetings. And I'm going to suggest the same thing for the city council. I think it's really important that we recognize what's happening on both sides so that we can come to the most appropriate agreement for all of the citizens in Lewiston. And it's going to be a hard discussion this year. It's not just this budget we're looking at that's going to be significant. It's the city is going to have the same thing. So I think that we want to, I want to try to avoid that one meeting. And I've lived this, right? Being on the school committee before, that one meeting that the school committee and the city council gets together for a workshop. And honestly, in all the years that I've done it, there's only a couple of questions that get asked. It's really the time we need to have that conversation. And so I'm just putting that out there again publicly to make sure we have that conversation. I'm going to do the best I can to facilitate and get the language across to both sides as we're going through this process. But I'm just one person. It's really important that we all put an effort in to go do that as well. And I'm going to, like I said, say that to city council also. Thank you.
Thank you. Student rep is not here, so updates from school committee subcommittees. Mr. Beauparlon.
Thank you. The curriculum committee on social studies meets tomorrow. We're looking forward to it. I believe member Ames will be joining us, and we'll continue a very productive meeting and process.
Thank you. I'll just reiterate what Linda just said is just because it's a separate item. The finance committee is meeting tomorrow afternoon for the first time. That's all I have. I'm also on negotiations, but I haven't heard anything about negotiations yet. So thank you.
Yeah, once we start the next negotiations for the next contract, you'll be involved in with all of them going forward. So, but as of right now, we're still working with the certified professionals. So.
Yeah, so I'll just share over the weekend, school committee members on most subcommittees should have received invites to some meetings starting this month. I have a couple more subcommittees to schedule and send out invites for. So if you haven't received any, then I will, they will be coming, but I did schedule those this weekend and tried to do a rotation so that they weren't all in 1 week and in one at one time. So if you haven't looked at your calendar, your Google Calendar or your school committee email, please do so and you'll see those meeting dates.
School committee community announcements, if there are any, other than the open house on the 24th. Seeing none, future agenda items. I mean, we've got a full load here with this month with budgets, but I'm more than happy to take other suggestions.
It doesn't have to be a full agenda item, but I'd like a brief update at some point on the rollout of getting Narcan into our schools and getting our teachers and staff trained.
I was just going to share that some things have been brought up about high school communication as it relates to graduation and also a review of graduation requirements. I just want to let you know that while those haven't been brought to this table, I have inquired with the student services director about the communication for graduation. I think there's areas for improvement that we want to have there so that students have the appropriate support. Principal Putnam is already working on that and convening a group at the high school to try to figure that out, map that out. It's such a, as you all know, a critical conversation to students that impacts their emotions and their pride and their family commitment and their school commitment. It's a very loaded conversation. We want to make sure we're providing the right supports and having it frequently enough that kids know exactly where they're at without unnecessary stressors or pressures on them because of the tone of the conversation. So that's work that's happening. Also, Mr. Putnam looked over last year's recommendation and the current structures for students to do makeup work as far as credit criteria. And he and his team felt like there was the best step to take was to not make changes for graduation credits this year, but to maintain what they had in place. And so that's, if you'd like to discuss those items any further, please let me know. But I just want to make sure you had a quick update on that work has been getting done. And I've been talking to, communicating with Ms. Eames, who's heard some things from community and really appreciate you gathering that and elevating that to make sure that we keep moving forward on that work.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Mr. Bopal.
Thank you. Although the Pledge of Allegiance issue is a done issue, I would suspect we plan our time for a contingent of people to make their feelings known on it. I think we had a little hint of that from the public comment when they weren't ready to amass their support for this. So I just suggest we be aware that that might be an issue.
Anyone else? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned, 9 o'clock.